So the Super Bowl was last night, and I rarely do topical videos here at Disciple Dojo. And by topical, I mean trying to in any way cash in on some of the trending hashtags or topics or anything like that. However, I do see questions every now and then that people leave in comment sections, and I actually wanted to address this one. And while it's in the cultural zeitgeist right now, I figure that's as good a time as any. A viewer asked, hey, I would like to hear your thoughts on the He Gets Us campaign, all those ads that ran during the Super Bowl. Now, I had the Super Bowl on last night while I was doing some editing work. I was watching it, not really paying tremendous amount of attention. For me, after the NCAA championship, football ends until next fall. And I've seen the He Gets Us commercials from time to time, and I saw a couple of them pop up during the Super Bowl. What interested me, though, was the reaction that I saw on my social media feed. Now, I have friends, and I genuinely consider them friends. I love them, but they are super progressive Christians, like hard left progressive Christians. And one of them posted that one, Jesus wouldn't approve of spending millions of dollars on a Super Bowl ad, and He Gets Us, it was judgmental and heavy-handed, and it's too anti-LGBTQIA, it's too anti-choice, which was wild because there's really none of that in the commercials. You'd have to go and maybe look at the stances of some of the people involved in the campaign and kind of ferret out where they land on those things. But the commercials themselves, I was like, well, I didn't catch that at all. Then I have some super right-wing Christian friends, like hardcore Republican, social conservative, financial conservative, cultural conservative, and they posted, like these were almost back to back in my feed, and they posted this He Gets Us campaign. It's like a Trojan horse. They're trying to sneak in social justice, progressive politics, and open borders, and they're excusing sin. They're not, so it was wild to me because you had Christians thought these commercials are too condemning, they're too judgy, they're too preachy. And then you had Christians condemning the exact same commercials because they're not judgy enough, or they're light on truth and big on grace or anything else. And so I made this post and I just said this: Disciple Dojo Super Bowl observation. My liberal friends seem to hate the He Gets Us ads for being anti-choice and anti-LGBTQIA. My conservative friends seem to hate the He Gets Us ads for being, quote, social justice and progressive. Both my liberal and conservative friends seem to think that wasting millions of dollars on a 30-second commercial is something Jesus would never approve of, which is interestingly a sentiment Judas expressed one time when someone wasted an extravagant amount of money on Jesus in John 12. It's funny because the actual Jesus had a way of upsetting cultural extremists on both sides in the first century as well. And for those who aren't familiar with the John 12 reference, this is what it is. When Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem and would ultimately be crucified, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Just as an aside, has nothing to do with this video. If you read John's gospel and you read about the disciple Jesus loved, it's never named, and church tradition just assumed that it's John. But read it sometime and ask yourself, could Lazarus, who is reclining at the table with Jesus in this scene, and who is mentioned at the house Jesus is staying at, and who lived near Jerusalem, unlike John, might Lazarus have been the disciple Jesus loved? And if so, then is John's gospel based on Lazarus's testimony rather than John, son of Zebedee, as it appears in The Chosen? Just something to think about. Not a hill to die on. But they're gathered for dinner at Lazarus' house. And then, verse 3, then Mary, Lazarus' sister, took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Now, this word, pure nard, which always makes anybody who's ever watched the movie Monster Squad laugh. Nard is just transliterating that Greek word. Nardu. And it's a spice. It comes from India. It's incredibly expensive. So imagine like about a pint, like a half liter of the purest, most expensive spice you can imagine. Those of you that are big into essential oils, whatever the most expensive essential oil is, picture that. And Mary comes in and just pours it all out over Jesus's feet. Now, for us, that would be like, that's a mess. But this was an act of devotion. This was an act of adoration. This was an act of honoring someone, but not everybody saw it that way. And in verse 12, but one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. Now, John goes on to say that Judas wasn't really concerned about the poor. It's rather because he was the guy keeping the money and he was a thief and he would help himself to whatever was in their collective money bag. But this question I couldn't help think about whenever I've seen both of my liberal and my conservative friends bemoaning the fact that somebody would spend millions of dollars on these 30-second Super Bowl ads. And both sides said you could take this money and give it to the poor. So it just made me think of Judas as soon as I read that. And this is a gentle reminder that we shouldn't be so quick to assume that anything extravagant directed towards Jesus by someone is necessarily wrong. Now, there are health and wealth teachers out there teaching utter nonsense. This is not even remotely along the idea of the prosperity heresy, the idea that the more you spend on Jesus, the more you get blessed in return. All of this nonsense that gets taught on TV. And we've dealt with the prosperity gospel here on the channel before. It's foolishness, it's nonsense, it's actually evil. But that doesn't necessarily mean that asceticism is always the holier option. So just something to think about when you're evaluating this He Gets Us campaign. But what is the He Gets Us campaign? Like, what are these commercials anyway? Well, if you go to hegetsus.com, it takes you to this website with these different commercials, these different videos. These are all the different ones that they run. You can watch it, and then there's a little, explanation about what they're trying to say through it. And so let's just watch one. I didn't see this one during the Super Bowl. I saw another one. It popped up, the one about foot washing and something else. And I've seen others before. But let's just take a look at this one and see. So you've got pictures of people that look kind of outcast, overlooked, a homeless woman, panhandling. He Gets Us, love your neighbor. That's it. Okay. I missed the social justice in that one, and I missed the anti-LGBT bigotry in that one. So then I watched this one, and we won't watch it because it's a little bit longer, but it's the one on the woman at the well. And it just basically tells the story of Jesus and his encounter with the Samaritan woman and gives some of the cultural background.
The big picture answers the woman's question. Why are you talking to me? Because you matter. Jesus took the time to listen to a lonely minority woman who was a stranger. He thought very highly of people his culture did not. What would happen if we tried to do the same?
Again, is pointing out the cultural background of this encounter. And yeah, Jesus said more to her. They talked about, the coming Messiah and where should you worship, and, if it's Samaritans or if it's the Jews, because there was a rift between them in who was the heirs of Israel at the time of the first century. But explaining in a couple of minutes on a commercial the cultural background, I'm just not seeing much that I would object to as a Bible teacher when I watch this. In fact, I think they do a pretty good job of at least, now these are not aimed at church people. These are not aimed at Christians. These aren't aimed at the super progressive far left Christian friends of mine who are involved in all of the causes that their churches support. And it's not aimed at the super conservative Christian friends of mine who have their views of how church and culture should interact. So the critiques of both of those groups of people to me just seem irrelevant, really. When I actually look at what I'm seeing in these commercials, I think it's doing what Jesus himself did many times in the New Testament. See, Jesus had this funny way of when people approached him, wanting him to take a side in one of their arguments, whether it was theological, whether it was sociocultural, Jesus had a way of kind of alienating both sides, or at least not conforming to what they thought he should be doing or saying. And as somebody, again, I haven't done a deep dive into who the board members of the Come Near nonprofit, which is the ones responsible for collecting the donations to do the He Gets Us campaign. I haven't looked into what their specific politics are. And I really don't plan to, because I don't plan on giving any money to this campaign. So I'm really not that concerned with it. But everything I've seen when I did click through the FAQs on the website and looked at some of the videos, I haven't seen anything that isn't doing what Jesus has been doing for people for 2,000 years, which is making them uncomfortable in their complacencies. These commercials challenge the stereotypes of Jesus, whether it's liberal social justice warrior Jesus, who is all about overthrowing capitalism and cis-het normality, or whether it's Republican conservative Jesus, who wants everybody to have a rifle and a Bible and build a wall around the country to keep out immigrants. See, this campaign, I think, disturbs a lot of people because it challenges the Jesus they've created in their own image. Now, I'm not saying that's accurate for everybody. I'm speaking at a large scale stereotypical level. Are there people who could raise reasonable objections on either side of the spectrum to the group that's putting these commercials together? Probably. And if they were to do so in a way that was charitable, that thought the best of what's going on instead of the snide social media hot take approach, I'd be interested to listen. I'm not endorsing the He Gets Us campaign, but I am saying I haven't seen anything in it that would make me not be okay with it. Does the historic Christian faith push against elements of progressive left-wing culture in America? Absolutely it does. On issues of human rights for the unborn, it certainly does. On issues of sexual integrity, it certainly does. But does the gospel likewise push against elements of conservative American culture? Absolutely it does. It challenges empire. The gospel challenges those who would not want to reach across cultural, religious, ethnic lines. The bottom line is the gospel has always made people uncomfortable. So I like the fact that the He Gets Us campaign is making Christians uncomfortable, honestly. Whether it will have the impact that the organizers want, that remains to be seen. If it gets people to look at Jesus in a new way who have already written him off as irrelevant to their life, I'm all for it. If somebody's going to critique the commercials because they don't present the clear, full gospel in all of its nuance, including sin and repentance and righteousness, what commercial ever could do that? Not one that would be effective that I can imagine in any way, shape, or form. So let me just say this. If you aren't on board with the He Gets Us campaign and you have a problem with it, talk to God about how he may be using even something as imperfect as a mass market evangelism campaign. Look at the engagement that happened cross-culturally in both Old Testament and New Testament. Read books like Jonah. Look at events like Acts chapter 17. Read through the Gospels and see how Jesus interacts with the religious leaders of his day and the crowds who were expecting that a Messiah should or shouldn't act this way. Look at all of that and then make your judgments in light of that. But make no mistake about it, Jesus was not a Democrat and Jesus was not a Republican. Jesus wasn't even libertarian. Jesus is King. He is the Messiah. He is the risen Lord. He's the one who will come to put all things right. And for those who are opposing him, that's dreadful news. And for those who are longing for salvation and vindication, that's amazing news. So instead of focusing on campaigns like He Gets Us or social justice agenda or fear of social justice agenda, focus on the Jesus we encounter in Scripture and how he challenges us to be his followers in the different cultures into which he's placed us. So, viewer who asked that question, I appreciate you asking. Those are my thoughts on the He Gets Us campaign. I hope that in some way is insightful. Thanks for watching. As always, stay tuned for more here at Disciple Dojo. In the meantime, keep training.